Well, hello everyone. My name's Dre. Welcome back to our Creator Studio weekly webinar series. I'll be your host today. We'll be discussing some exciting topics around Salesforce today. But the first thing that I want to do is just cover some of our upcoming sessions. So let's go ahead and look at that briefly. So of course, today we're going to be discussing Salesforce contact creation, but next week we'll be discussing Salesforce contact lookups. So sort of, again, we've built sort of the series, I guess, of Salesforce Creator Studio use cases. And both of these will be sort of in line with that. Finally, on July 10th, we'll be discussing SharePoint site lookups with Creator Studio. We've done SharePoint list lookups, which will be somewhat similar. Of course, sites are a different kind of object, so there'll be some details that are specific to that kind of use case. But with that in mind, let's go ahead and get started for today. Today's agenda, again, we'll be discussing Salesforce contact creation within a Creator Studio use case. We'll spend some time talking about the use case, how you would set it up, what it looks like, and we'll end with a Q&A session. So please hold any of your questions until the end of the call. I'll make sure that we get ample time to discuss any questions that come up. So with that, let's go ahead and jump into Salesforce contact creation. So some motivation, again, I always like to start with some motivation about why you would even want to build this. I think the obvious use case is for sales teams. So let's say that they're talking with a new customer or they meet someone new while speaking with a customer and they want to add a contact to Salesforce. Salesforce exposes APIs that allow us to pretty easily build use cases that create new contacts. So there are some sort of things to keep in mind that I want to talk about here in a bit. What I will say is I don't want to discuss much about authentication. Of course, if you have questions about it, we can talk about it at the end, but we do have a session that covers authentication already. So we will try to keep this focused in on sort of building use case and what the use case kind of looks like. So let's start with the intended user experience. Now this is quite a long user experience, so I had to split it into two, hence the little arrow. So just know that at the end of the first screenshot, it goes to the next screenshot. But in this case, this is a user-initiated interaction. So Gwen comes to the bot and asks the bot, specifically, I'd like to create a new Salesforce contact. By asking this question, she triggers this use case. So right away, we're thinking, again, if you're asking the question, if you're a user-initiated use case, you're talking about a queries or a paths use case. And in this case, we actually need to ask a bunch of follow-up questions because we need to get all the data we need to create the contact. So that leads us to a path use case. I'd like to create a new Salesforce contact. The bot comes back and says, okay, what is the email of your contact? What is the name of your contact? What is the account that the contact should be added to? In Salesforce, if you don't add an account, you can create the contact still. It just becomes an orphaned contact and it's hard to find. So it's important that you add that you somehow associate it with an account. Now, there's a couple of ways to do this. The way that we're doing it today is by just passing the ID, just to sort of show the art of the possible. However, you could potentially build this use case to first look up the account ID. You could also build a use case where perhaps you're saying the name of the account or it's just implicit based on the use case that's being triggered. If you have a particular important account or a large account that needs a lot of contacts to be created for it, you could create a use case entirely for that account. I think most realistically, though, we're talking about building use cases where you do an account lookup of some sort. So again, we can talk about that during the Q&A session if you'd like. Today, we'll just use the account ID. We'll make things a little bit easier for us. This is a pretty simple use case diagram, so or architecture slash like process diagram. Again, this is a use case driven by the user. So the user comes to the bot, which is sort of represented by this chat bot, text window here, speech bubble. And the user is going to say something along the lines of, I want to create a new contact in Salesforce. That's going to trigger our paths use case, which is going to go back to the user and ask a bunch of questions. So it's going to collect all this data. It'll finally format that in an API call to Salesforce. I'll show us the configurations for that here in a moment. And then finally, that API call will make an update in the contact table. So let's go ahead and take a look at what those configurations look like. Now, bear with me for a moment. I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and I'm going to pull up the use case in our configurator. Hmm. a moment to load. There we have it. So let's go ahead and show this. We'll let it load while it's doing its thing. Let's see, where's the share button? I've lost it. There we go. Okay, so this is the use case that we'll see a demo of here in a moment. I've called it just Salesforce create contacts and then put demo because this is an instance that I share with other people. So they just know that this is a demo use case. And this use case, again, is going to create a new contact in Salesforce. So let's go ahead and take a look at the configurations. So here's an example of what the paths use case conversation flow might look like. Again, this is just what we have configured for our demo. Highly configurable, though there's quite a few fields you could pass in a Salesforce contact creation API call. Today, though, we're only going to focus on just a handful to sort of get to the point of sort of what the demo is trying to do. So the first question, again, is what is the email of your new contact? Of course, we have a free input here, so the user adds the email. They just type it into the chat. What is the first name of your contact? Again, this is a free input. What is the last name of your new contact? Again, free input. And then finally, what is the phone number of your new contact? Free input. And again, we have this sort of extra question here. What is the ID of the account to which the new contact belongs? And again, free input. So then finally, we execute an API. So this is sort of the meat of the use case, I would say. We have a Salesforce connector here, Dre's demo Salesforce 2. And then we're going to look at the configurations here. So we're actually going to make an S-objects call to the contact table. This is going to be a post API call. Headers are important here. So you need to say content type is application JSON. There are no query parameters here. And finally, the request body. It's a pretty simple API. Salesforce actually has a really nice API, I think. And so, last name is just called last name. You enter that as the variable that we've configured in our paths use case. First name, same thing. Email and account ID, same thing. Finally, the action description here, I have submit request to add a new contact. And the reason that I've said this instead of just say add a new contact is when the bot then makes this API call, it's going to get back a success message, presumably a 200 success code. And we want to show that to the user that while we've made this call, we don't know for sure that it's been completed. I mean there's a couple of reasons why, or edge cases where it may not have gone all the way through. So by saying submit request to add a new contact, this makes the bot generate a sort of reasonable response. And I'll show you what I mean by that in a moment. That indicates that the request has been successfully made. Now it's sort of up to Salesforce to finish the addition. So this is our API configuration. We can go ahead and exit out of this. And we can look at our triggering criteria. So there's quite a few here. There's actually more negative utterances than positive utterances. What I mean by this is these are utterances where the use case should not trigger. So examples of that would be, what is the best approach to add a new lead as a contact in Salesforce? This use case does not explicitly add users as a new lead, nor is this really providing information. It's just doing the action. So I would recommend having like a knowledge article for that kind of query. Whereas I need to create a new contact in Salesforce is, I think, very clearly related to this actual use case. And so we would want the use case to trigger. And you can use that sort of as a template, that dichotomy of what a positive utterance and a negative utterance would be, and see all of these. So how can I add a new contact in Salesforce? There's a new lead submission. Can you assist in adding them as a contact? Can you walk me through the process of adding a new contact, et cetera, et cetera. So anytime the user's trying to ask, I want to explicitly add a new contact, we want this use case to trigger. Finally, I have this set up to launch to just myself. We don't really want this to be public yet. It's still in development, you could say, but when you are ready to launch, you simply click launch to all users. Yes, it's ready to be launched to production, and launch to all users is sort of an extra check. I'm not going to do that today, but we can still go ahead and take a look at our use case. So let me go ahead and pull up the demo. And we will get this rolling. Oh, goodness, I always lose the share button. There we go. Pretty good on time still. Okay, so we can come to the bot and say something along the lines of, can you help me create a new contact in Salesforce? Got it. So it's going to go ahead and trigger our use case. It's going to understand what we're asking, and you can see it's already triggering our use case. So can you help? Please provide the email of the new contact you'd like to create in Salesforce. I'll go ahead and add a dummy email. Let's call it john.here@customer.com. Go ahead and hand that over to the bot. The bot's going to take that email address and add it to our variable contact email. What is the first name of your new contact? Go ahead and fill out the rest of this information. We'll give it John. Again, that'll add that to the first name variable that we've configured. First name. Oops. I'm not ready for you there yet, bot. What is the last name of your contact? We'll go ahead and give it the same that we provided in the email. Dear. Let that add it to the last name variable. Finally, what is the phone number? 67890. Just give us some phone number. Allow that to load up as the phone number variable. And finally, we'll need an account ID. It'll ask us for the account ID. So let me go ahead and grab that very quickly from my Salesforce dev instance. You can see our sort of current list of contacts. By the way, this is a good check. We can see that there's 5 contacts currently. None of these are John Deere. So we'll add the account ID. Finally, that'll add that to the account ID variable. It'll configure the API call that we had set up earlier, or at least fill the values there. And then it'll make the API call here in a moment. But it's going to first check with us and ask if the data that we've presented is what we expect. So let's go ahead and let it show that. So please confirm that the details for creating the new account or contact in Salesforce are correct. Account ID here, contact email, all this looks very good to me. There's nothing here that I would like to change. So we'll go ahead and click yes. Now, if you'll remember, I specified we want to make sure that the API call is to submit a request to add a contact. And so your request to add a new contact has been successfully submitted. Again, this sort of indicates that the process has been kicked off. I think that most people would read this as a positive success message, but I think it's worthwhile to be careful with your wording. Let's go back to the contacts list though, and we will refresh. And we'll go ahead and see now that there should be 6. Indeed, there is. And John Deere is now a new contact for this, random test company, Edge Communications. Very good. So let's go ahead and go back to our slides, and we can finish up the content portion of this this call. Let's do slideshow. And before we move on to the Q&A session, I just wanted to provide some sort of resources you can use to learn more, whether you want to maybe build this use case yourself or just learn more about Creator Studio, if you have any questions, that kind of thing. So the first resource I wanted to provide is the Creator Studio Developer Certification. This is something you can find on our Moveworks Academy portal, which you should have as long as you have access to Creator Studio, Moveworks setup, that kind of thing. This is going to be a place where you can go and learn really anything about Moveworks. We offer coursework, training modules, that kind of thing. And specifically for Creator Studio, the developer certification for Creator Studio is going to be relevant, of course. Now we'll provide sort of example use cases that you can build in this coursework, as well as a certification at the end of it that you can showcase on LinkedIn to sort of prove your knowledge of Creator Studio. So highly recommend going through this course. Finally, our documentation and developer community. Our documentation portal you can find at help.moveworks.com. An incredible resource. I would consider this as your sort of reference material for all things Moveworks, both as far as what skills are available to you, as far as how the bot can be set up, but also for use case guides, tutorials, testing tools for the event API. I mean, there's a lot of things here that I think you should review if you intend to build use cases in Creator Studio. And then finally is our developer community. This is a forum that you can go to ask questions from your peers to your other Moveworks customers, to product owners and engineers who work in that forum as well. So really good resource to get help, especially very deep help, with folks who are very involved with product. So with that, we'll go ahead and open up things to an Q&A. Now, the way that I want to do this is if you have a question, please go ahead and add it to the chat. I'll unmute you. We can discuss it. It just keeps things a little bit more organized. But I'll stick around here for at least a few minutes in case anyone has questions, and we can discuss. Think of this as like an office hours. Yeah, James, I see you've asked a question. Let me go ahead and unmute you. A lot of talk. Okay, so James, I see your question is, in your iPass tool, are you using logic to confirm the field inputs? Is this a question about sort of about like data validation, just to make sure like the user is using a correct phone number, that kind of thing?
Yeah. So like I know you're passing the variables to the like your iPass tool, like whatever you're using. But like as an example, like say it was like an email address or like a number, are you using some kind of logic to figure out if it's a number or an email address? And if it's
It's a
not to pass it and do the API call?
it's a good question. So the demo that we use today actually is not using an iPass tool. It's going directly to Salesforce.
Ah,
So there is no validation. Now, I think it would be a good idea to build this use case with validation. And that kind of goes back to even like the account ID, right? Because it's not expected that most users would know the account
yeah,
ID.
I was thinking that like it was kind of a weird input.
Yeah, yeah. Definitely wouldn't recommend building the use case that way. So in that case, an iPass tool does make sense. And the way you would do that is, of course, you would have the pass use case actually end at each data collection point, send it to the iPass tool. The iPass tool can have logic to validate that that is a realistic, email address or realistic phone number. And if not, you can use an event triggered path to sort of send back a notification and say, hey, that actually doesn't make any sense. That's not a real phone number. Do you want to enter it again?
Oh,
So
so
that
you would do an event triggered path to respond back to the user, like you would call it, is what you're saying?
Yeah, that's what I would recommend. And you can use slots, which I didn't really talk very much about in this call, but you can use slots as like a sense of state saving. So you would send like, okay, what step that they're on, and then the iPass tool workflow. So that way you only need one.
Yeah, I think I get the slots. It's just passing variables to whatever API you want to call,
Yeah.
essentially.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we did an account lookup use case a few weeks ago. I think we did account. If not, we did opportunity lookups. It was something similar. And so there are pretty good ways of doing things like account queries based on the account name. But a user doesn't need to know the exact spelling. For example, I think you can say like where name like whatever the user puts in. Um, so
So,
there's a lot of flexibility about how you would build this use case.
so say like a user put in the wrong information, like would I have to return like an error code back at them? Or like an HTTP response, or is what you're saying, or
I probably wouldn't use an HTTP response because Path Studio doesn't actually have any ability to like change behavior based on the response of the API. So instead, what you would do is you would change the response in your event triggered path, if that makes sense. So you send the information, validation takes place. Uh,
Mhm.
if good, then event triggered path for the next step where everything's working well. Then you ask for the next piece of information. If everything is not working well, then event triggered path that says, hey, actually re-enter that. Now, something to consider though is that you really only could do like basic validation because in the same way that like if you go to Salesforce and enter the wrong phone number, it has no way of knowing that that's the wrong phone number.
Yeah,
You just have to basically say like, are there 9 digits or 10 digits? Does it look like a phone number? So probably a regex operation if I had to guess.
gotcha. Okay.
Yeah. All right. I'm going to go ahead and unmute Reed. James, I'll leave you. Actually, let me go ahead and just unmute everybody. This is kind of a weird way to do it. Here, allowed to talk, allowed to talk. Okay. Reed, I see your question. Is it reasonable to assume people? Okay, sorry. I think we might have addressed that one. Um, do you have any other questions, I guess, about the account ID thing? I knew that was going to come up because it's like a weird way to do it is enter the account ID. I don't think that's reasonable. No. I will say that eventually we'll have something called query triggered paths. It's not GA yet, so I didn't want to build our demo today using it, but that is probably the best way to do this. And the way that that would look is you would say, what, I want to, I want to add a new account. Then the first question would be like, for what account? And then that would allow you to trigger what's called a query. A query's use case is going to bring back a bunch of data for all the different accounts that match your query. And then you can use that to sort of trigger a path. Again, it's not available today, so you'll have to use an iPass tool. A little bit of a word vomit for me there. So please, ask any questions. I'm happy to clarify anything there. All right. So I'm going to go ahead and collect the questions that were asked today. Thank you again very much. Those were really, really good clarifying questions. I will create a post on community in the next 24 hours or so with also a sort of detailed explanations of these questions and an overview of sort of what we talked about today. So keep an eye out for that. Definitely happy to also answer any follow-up questions there. I think we should just use that forum post as a place to, ask questions related to this use case or how you might set it up. With that, I'll give you guys one last chance if you have any other questions. Otherwise, we'll close things down at the 55-minute mark. And yeah, wish you all a good day. All right. Well, thanks very much, guys. Hope to catch you next time or some other session. But have a good one. And please reach out to me if you have any questions about this use case or any other use case. I'm always happy to chat. Take care, y'all.